Welcome to the Happiness Matters podcast with me, your coach, Julia Seal, where we explore the puzzle of whole-being happiness as professional women in our midlife, how to coach ourselves and live into the best version of ourselves, resilient, creative, and thriving, no matter what. Hi everyone, and welcome to the very first brain management episode on our brain's design. If you remember from my overview of Series 2, we have 4 aspects to learning how to manage our brains on purpose for our midlife happiness, the 4 corners of our happiness puzzle, the pieces that hold it all together. These are brain design and meditation and body as brain and thinking patterns. And in this first brain episode, we're going to look at the very basics of our brain's design. No, this is not a medical podcast or even a neuroscience podcast, but a way of understanding our brains so that we can coach our midlife happiness and use these incredible supercomputers to live into the best versions of ourselves. More specifically today, we'll be looking at a brain design choice to choose whether we react automatically or respond skillfully to difficult situations and difficult people, and why. So let's get started with Brain Design 101. Much of what we understand nowadays about our brain design comes from work pioneered as far back as the 1950s and 1960s at Yale University by neuroscientist Dr. Paul MacLean. The focus of his work was to explore how our brain evolved, particularly looking at our brain's control of emotion and behavior, and finding out why we can be both rational and primal and violent. Dr. MacLean described our brains as being divided into 3 layers, each one developing on top of one another as we evolved. He called it the triune brain. So in his model, deep inside our brains at the very core is what he called the reptilian or primal brain, the oldest part of our brain controlling vital functions like breathing, body temperature, heart rate, balance, and our primal instincts, so the flight or fight survival response that you know quite well. So automatic reactions to our environments that are out of our conscious control. Next, he described the paleomammalian or the old mammal or emotional brain, which controls our emotional responses, our motivations, and our memories. And lastly, the neo-mammalian, the new mammal or rational brain, also called the neocortex, controlling language, reason, abstract thought, imagination, and planning. And in Paul MacLean's triune brain, these structures are seen as operating independently, where primitive emotions overrule conscious thoughts. So fight or flight reactions overrule our logical brain's responses. In other words, the difference between automatic reactions and considered responses. At the time, his model of the brain tied in beautifully with Freud's tripartite view of the mind, with the superego, the ego, and the id. It's also helped scientists understand what's happening in brains that are damaged, like people with Alzheimer's and dementia. For us, one of the ways to approach our self-coaching is through this lens too, understanding our brain design through the triune brain design, or even more simply, through just the primal brain and the human brain differentiation. I do want to say this, however. The way I'm approaching our brain design today is very simple, and I'm doing this for ease of understanding if this is the first time you've heard about this, and about the differentiation between responding and reacting. Not because I think you're not smart enough, but because taking such a simple view has been so incredibly helpful to me personally. I didn't need a huge amount of detail or neuroscience knowledge in order to use these brain design insights to really help my own self-coaching and my own happiness journey. And I want to share this with you today. I also want to point out that more modern neuroscientists have expanded on Dr. McLean's very clear-cut model of how our brains work and where our emotions come from. Modern advances in brain imaging tell us much more about what our brains are up to during primal, emotional, and rational experiences, and it is much more complex than how I'm talking about it here. However, we've got the whole of Series 2 to dive deep into brain management and how we can use our brain design on purpose and intentionally towards whole being happiness in our midlife. So for today, bear with me, I'm keeping it simple. Right now, I also want to remind you to download my free coaching tool that I introduced in Series 1, where we were talking about toxicity and our afflictive emotions, and working with this idea of different parts of our brains governing automatic flight or fight reactions and skilled responses. The tool is called High Road, Low Road, and we'll be using it throughout Series 2 as a framework to get you practicing managing your brain on purpose in your everyday life. You'll find the tool on the website Happiness-Matters.coach under the Fun and Free section, and you'll also want to listen to episode 1.30 that explains it in detail. Also important for you to know now is that from March, I'll be running my Happiness Habit Challenges for my clients, but also for all my podcast listeners. This is your chance to set up a new habit in your life using brain design to help you do it easily. And you might even want to build one of the brain management skills we talk about here, or perhaps just a new way of being that you want to grow into in 2021. As part of this Happiness Habit Challenge, I'm going to run a free webinar to teach an expanded version of this particular coaching tool, my High Road, Low Road. So if you want to sign up for the Habit Challenge and the webinar, please subscribe to my coaching notes by email, and the link for this is also on the website, Happiness-Matters.coach. Okay, so Dr. McLean was fascinated by why we can be both rational and primal, even violent beings, why we respond sometimes very calmly and logically, and why other times we react automatically and like we're off our heads, almost like it's an instant instinct that we have no control over. And we've all been there, haven't we? Think about the last time that you squabbled with your husband or snapped at your kids. We probably see it the most often in ourselves while driving. Some days we can let someone ahead of us into the traffic, responding calmly and kindly, no matter what the other drivers are doing. And on another day, we react completely differently. We shout at them from the safety of our cars. Think of road rage. I don't know about you, but I found when I was going through menopause, and actually it was more beforehand during perimenopause, when I hadn't yet figured out what was happening, I was far more irritable, some days even tearful, much more reactive. It gets better, doesn't it, as our bodies settle down after menopause. But even more so when you've mastered the simple coaching tool of the choice to react or respond. My experience and that of my clients is why I'm focusing so much on brain design in our happiness journey together, because I feel so strongly about how this basic understanding can exponentially expand our happiness. What we're looking at is a true secret to happiness in this distinction. The difference between our ability to respond or react to something outside of us in the world. Let me share how I've used it through understanding the differences between our primal brain, our primitive brain, and our human brain. As I said earlier, our primal brain, our primitive brain, is that part of our brain that's concerned with the basics of our lives, our survival. It's our brain that has developed to act incredibly fast. It's focused on our survival, and so it has evolved to always be on the lookout for threats to our survival. That's danger. Pain to avoid, threats to our survival, anything actually that startles it. So what might startle our primal brain? A loud noise? An object moving towards us at speed? Anything fearful? Just think of us as cavemen with lions and snakes around us. Every time we stepped out of the cave, our survival was at risk. And our brain will react at lightning speed to anything that startles it, that it sees as threatening our survival, and it reacts with flight or fight. So this fantastic mechanism of our brains reacts very, very quickly to anything it sees as a threat to our very being. Now, our primal brain is not only motivated by fear while looking out for our survival. At work is an interdependent relationship between three strong motivators, like a survival motivational triad, if you want an easy way to think of it. Which, interestingly, if you're into psychology, coincides quite nicely with the victim triangle and the winner's triangle. But more about that in another episode. So this triad describes how our primitive brain operates, what motivates it. So it's a triad, so three things: pain, pleasure, ease. These are the three things that motivate our primitive brain: to avoid pain, to seek pleasure, and to look for the easiest route for doing this. In other words, our primitive brain is focused only on our safety and survival, our comfort, and our hedonistic pleasure or hedonistic happiness, and it really likes sameness. So it's not just loud noises or scary creatures that triggers the primal brain, but anything that's perceived as a threat to our safety. Anything that threatens our ease, our comfort, our hedonistic pleasure. So anything potentially fearful like rejection or failure, anything new that comes in and rocks the boat of safety or causes confusion and doubt or challenges our comfort zone. Our inbuilt survival system kicks in to resist the change, and our immediate reaction is to resist and push the change away. This is how we've evolved, how our brains have evolved to ensure our survival. So just remember that our primitive automatic brain is reactive. And with an unmanaged brain, our primal reactive brain is usually in charge. And this becomes, as we grow up, our default reaction to anything that comes up in our lives. Now, our human thinking brain, and in previous episodes I've called it our prefrontal cortex because I was being more specific, but our human brain, this is the part of our brain responsible for thought, self-control, logic, reasoning, language, and abstract thought like imagination and planning, even visioning, your midlife happiness. So the human brain is not designed for lightning-fast reactions for our survival. It isn't about the survival instinct, but it's the realm of our thoughts, all of our thoughts, even the ones that might seem to be automatic, as they are out of our current awareness. This is the arena of the on-purpose use of our brains. Our human brain is responsive. And this is where we get to choose our responses to a situation rather than the automatic reacting of the primal brain. So instead of reacting to an event that triggers us, we're able instead to respond more skillfully, overriding our automatic reaction, our instinct, with conscious thought, and decide on purpose to respond differently to what's facing us. Let's take conflict. If there was a lot of shouting and scary conflict in the home when you were growing up, you might have found that running away and hiding until things calmed down worked really well. So your brain learns that the best survival reaction to shouting conflict is to move away from it. This was me, by the way. I used to hide under the ping pong table. Your brain then sets up an automatic, habituated pattern that comes into play whenever you find yourself in a shouting conflict situation. It knew this behavior pattern of hiding kept me safe. Now you're out in the world and people shout all the time. Anger is everywhere. I don't have to tell you that. But acting out, like running away and hiding, is no longer your best response. It doesn't work well for marriages, and it doesn't work at work. However, unless you learn a different response and actively practice it, your brain will keep running to its automatic reaction whenever it picks up a conflict situation. Remember, it thinks your survival's under threat and it needs to act fast. Now, if you decide that your typical automatic reaction doesn't actually help you anymore, or you don't get the result you want in your life, then yes, a different response is required. So the simplicity is just this. The automatic response that our primal brain is using for this particular situation is not suitable. It's inappropriate. And we don't have a more appropriate response that's set on automatic yet. This is the learned skill of moving from reaction to response, from primitive brain to human brain, from automatic flight or fight to considered, deliberate, mindful. In other words, it's about how we can learn to respond skillfully rather than react automatically to conflict, taking your default patterns out of your primitive brain and putting our thinking brains to work on it. So how do we actually go from reactive to responsive? So the first thing to consider is those situations where you've reacted a particular way and looking back, you wish you had responded differently. This is the easiest place to start in managing your brain on purpose. Ask yourself in that situation, who was running the show? Which part of your brain was in charge? Automatic reactive or considered responsive? Now, which part of your brain is running your life on average? How much are you on automatic pilot, reacting to life, and how much are you being mindfully responsive to life around you, even in the traffic? Can you get clearer on what are the situations, people, and emotions that seem to see you being more reactive more often, resulting in you behaving in ways you rather wish that you didn't do? Our happiness is dependent on how we use these aspects of our brain on purpose and intentionally. Now, for today, I don't want to add too much more to your self-coaching than these 4 questions. So why not spend the next days ahead watching yourself throughout your day, your whole life, to notice when you're responding and when you're reacting? Actually, you can do it at all levels of your life. So even though breathing is an automatic pattern built into our brains, you can also intentionally change how you're breathing as soon as you think about it. You can slow it right down. You can choose a different response to the automatic pattern of breathing. Emotions are where this skill becomes really useful to you. To notice when you're triggered by something that happens externally outside of you. Somebody says something or you imagine doing something. How reactive are you? Or do you watch what's going on around you even though you've got anger and irritation flooding through you, and then do you respond more carefully? Of course, watch yourself in traffic or in an argument with your husband, your mother, or your kids. How much are you reacting and how much are you responding? I'd love to hear your examples. Find Happiness-Matters.coach on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn and let me know how it's going. Just one note before I end is the more you become aware of yourself reacting and responding, remember to have compassion and acceptance for who you are right now. There is no right and wrong. So many patterns of our behavior, our reactivity, were laid down in our younger years, and you might only be noticing them now. Be kind to your brain. It's really only been looking after you all these years. To end off, don't forget to sign up for the upcoming Happiness Habit Challenge and download my High Road, Low Road coaching tool to support you in these explorations. In the next episode, we'll be looking at the next corner puzzle piece, mindfulness and meditation, and applying these insights into what you've learned today. So until we meet again, may you be happy, may you be free. There is no better time to coach together. Bye for now. Enjoy the days ahead meeting your reactive and your responsive brain patterns.
Thank you for joining us on this Happiness Matters podcast, coaching your whole-being happiness in midlife. To join Julia for more of her midlife conversations, subscribe for free to her coaching notes by email and to this podcast. Search for Happiness Matters in Midlife to find us in your favorite podcast player app. Once you're subscribed, both of these will be delivered to your device automatically. To find all of this, click the subscribe menu of our website, Happiness-Matters.coach. That's Happiness-Matters.coach. COACH. And thanks again for listening.